Welcome, witches. This is the Undercover Witch, and today we have Southern Demonology on with us. And you have your own podcast. I was looking through, and you have a wide range of subjects that it seems like you cover. Is there anything specific that you try to focus on when you're making episodes?
I started the podcast with the intention of just teaching others about some of the wild and weird things that you can encounter when studying the Hebrew Bible, the pseudepigrapha, which is the collection of works that were written between the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament, and just other kind of wonderful ancient Near Eastern oddities that you can encounter. And because I'm also a Nihongophile, a lover of all things Japan, I also cover a lot of that, and that's kind of spawned into covering yude, yokai, bakemono, whatever you might want to call them. So yeah, pretty much anything that's related to ghosts, demons, spiritual warfare. Those are typically the subjects in which Southern Demonology tends to revolve around.
You do have a degree in theology, is that correct?
I do, yeah. I have a master's of theological studies from Harvard.
That is awesome. I was also listening to an episode. I apologize, I don't remember which one it was, but from my understanding, in regards to at least like psychics and like paranormal things, are you kind of a skeptic when it comes to those? How did you end up in that theology field?
Um, I'm not a skeptic of the paranormal. I thoroughly believe in the demonic. I grew up in a very haunted environment. I grew up in the smallest town in Tennessee. Ghosts were just as real to its inhabitants as your neighbors happen to be. So yeah, I've always have believed it. I do tend to take an Occam's razor kind of approach of, is that bump in the night a mechanical failure, or is it really an otherworldly spirit? So
Right.
I don't just readily believe, but I always want to believe. I'll put it that way.
Right. I too experienced a lot of haunting situations when I was growing up, and so I think I'm the opposite though. I think I oftentimes don't want to believe, but there's been so many things that happen that I'm like, well, shit. Uh, so
I
I
can
definitely,
understand that all too well.
yeah, I'm like, man, I can't deny this, but um, yeah. So this is our ghost episode. I try to upload at least once a month, and I'm trying to get into the rhythm of sharing ghost stories on here. For listeners, I do put in, or I will put in this episode as well as future episodes, because I know the Undercover Witch, we cover more witchcraft based things. Ghost isn't exactly what our listeners here signed up for. So I do put in the description and in the title kind of what level I think if people are worried about getting scared listening to it. So I just want to put that as a disclaimer. If you're listening to this, we are going to be covering, hopefully focusing on paranormal, ghost topics, that sort of range. But I just want to let my listeners know and remember, because we're only like 2 or 3 episodes in for these ghost episodes. But I did want to ask you what experiences that you've had, because you said that you have had some experience, you grew up having experiences. Are there any that were just so evident that those were the ones that you remember every time you have like a doubt or you kind of wonder what's going on?
Yes, the one that I can point to, and there could be multiple explanations for it. I'm not saying that it's not, but it was when I was living in Japan for a couple of years working. I have stayed up for most of the night as part of whatever job duties I was happening to be doing at that point. I'm a developer. I had apparently just fallen asleep. The place that I was staying in, it was roughly about 400 square foot, but it had a extraordinarily large balcony. The balcony was almost the same size as the apartment itself, and it oversaw Tokyo Tower, which is kind of like a mini Eiffel Tower in replica. It's really beautiful at night. But anyway, I had fallen asleep and I had dreamt that there was this thing, and I couldn't clearly see it, but it was humanoid in shape, and it was pounding on the sliding glass door, and it kept saying a word,
Mhm.
Haidu, 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 but it wasn't an audible sound. I was hearing it directly inside of my brain. And the part that scared me the most is that, dreams, at least in my experience, can only replicate what you have directly experienced in life, right?
Right.
This is something I have never experienced before. It was almost like a psychic attack. The sounds were worming into my brain and causing some of the most horrendous pain I have ever experienced. Now, I have died in dreams, and every time I have died, my brain tells me, oh, you should be feeling a whole lot of pain. And I don't. I feel nothing. And it's kind of a really curious sensation of, you died, but you really didn't feel any negative effects from that experience. This one I did. It was horrible. And I finally woke up to a sound, which was my earthquake alarm going off on my phone. Because this was shortly after 3/11, the
Okay.
major catastrophe. And so we were still getting, it was still the country was being racked by small earthquakes all the time. So I woke up and it was a pretty big one, but nothing dangerous by any stretch of the imagination. And this whole experience shook me more than I could say. And I'm still kind of I know like really odd phrases in Japanese just from my studying, but I'm not so great at some of the more basics. And so I'm like, what is that word? And I actually went and looked it up, and sure enough, it means to enter. So this thing
Oh.
was demanding entry, and it was bombarding my brain with something. I have no idea what it was. And that was because most Japanese people, I mean, they almost everyone believes in spirits and ghosts and monsters. And one of the things is that you never walk by a graveyard, at least not without then protecting your entryways with purified salt, because that's supposed to drive them off.
Mhm.
And I always kind of thought that was silly. I've grown up in graveyards. I've never had an issue. And there was a graveyard just you could look down from my balcony and see one right at the corner. And yeah, I refused to go near that graveyard ever again, or at least if I did, I had bowls of purified salt at the entryway. So
Oh my God. Yeah, that's insane. Some of my experiences later when I was growing up, when I was a teen, a lot of them happened in the middle of the night. And some of those times I couldn't even tell if I was dreaming or not. But I remember people asking about them because they asked me why I believed in all of these things. Because according to them, I was pretty level headed and they were very, like, I wouldn't even say they were like skeptics. They were just very, very adamant non believers. They didn't even question it at all. And so they were like, well, you were dreaming. And I was like, I mean, yeah, but do you know how powerful dreams are? It's just, yeah, I think that is insane, especially with him like banging at the door, wanting that entry. It's not only that physical space that it wants to get into, but also this is in your head. in your kind of energy space trying to get in there as well. And that's
Exactly.
crazy.
And I knew without a shadow of a doubt that if I allowed this thing in, that would be the end of everything. Like,
Yeah, in any fashion. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So, but that's not the only encounter I've had. I've had other ones in certain locations that I have lived at in the US where it's kind of at that in between dream state.
Mhm.
I'm sure you've heard of, the figure of the hag, which, some may consider demonic in nature, some may not. But
Right.
I have had in going to about to fall asleep insidious whispers coming from the darkened corner of a room. And in my mind's eye, I knew it was a black clad female figure standing in the corner, wanting me uh, to to corrupt myself in some fashion or other. And this happened multiple times in this one location. Um, I haven't experienced since, thank goodness, but yeah, I mean, yes, it could be a dream. I'm not saying it's not, but
Right.
the sense of danger and malice and sweetness that came off from this thing, it still petrifies me to this day when I think about that.
Right.
I am interrupting this episode to remind you that if you have any ghost stories, paranormal experiences, or spiritual experiences that you would like to share on the podcast, to please email me at the witchundercover@gmail.com or go in my links and fill out the form. That way we can do our third episode every month that is all ghost stories.
I don't know if I sometimes get desensitized to my own experiences that I've had, but I tend to keep like journals of everything that happens to me because I know how I am. Do you have any experiences where you know what happened, but you it's hard to still relate to that you kind of have to remind yourself, yeah, this thing's happened to me before. Anything reoccurring?
The only reoccurring item that I can think of is that hag experience.
Mhm.
And that happened, I think, a total of probably 3 times in my life. Um, the other was the house I grew up in Tennessee. It it's over 200 years old. It was actually just last year finally demolished. But I grew up in this place, and it was essentially an open floor plan, 2-bedroom log cabin that had then been kind of tiled. The outside had been tiled over with concrete tiles that you see on roofing. It wasn't the most elegant of things, but it was home, so I loved it. But we our family had a kind of a ghost story legend of Patrick, which was this entity that lived upstairs. And while I was living there and up until 8th grade, I had had multiple encounters with something, whether it would be the attic door kind of swinging open on its own and then closing back with no wind, no sources of disturbance that could have caused this. And it was a very, very heavy door, to dreams where I've had the attic door open up, and then over where I used to sleep there was a picture of my great grandfather who hung there. And I still remember its eyes blazing like the sun and looking at me and predicting the day that I was going to die. More than a few experiences I had in that house that still freak me out when I think about them to this day. You know, the only kind of, we actually were talking about this in one of our paranormal rundown videos, not videos, but podcasts. It was the only emotion that kind of stays with you and is not dulled by the edge of time is embarrassment. You know,
Yeah.
you can think back to an embarrassing moment and you will still feel that full force of that hit you. Whereas when it's, terror or just being scared or angry, those fade. But I can think back to a couple of those instances and still feel that kind of tremor in my soul that those things inspired in the very beginning.
Right, right. Yeah, especially since starting this series, I feel like as I tell some of my own stories on here, it's almost like I realize like I've almost forgotten a little bit of what that felt like. And then as I tell them, I'm just like, oh my God, that was terrifying. And it kind of just, I feel like I'm reliving it in that moment.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So I was also listening to a few episodes, and it's my understanding that you do go out on like paranormal investigations. Is that right?
So I did in college. I went to a college that was founded in 1776 and had a very rich history of paranormal activity, especially in the church. The church was an ancient building, and uh, you know, the doors to all of the buildings at that time were open. So it doesn't matter if it was 3 or 4 a.m. If you wanted to go into a classroom, you want to go to the church and pray, you could do that. And people would often report feeling highly uneasy in that building, especially at night. And so I had a friend who was Wiccan, and another friend who was highly interested in all of this stuff, as well as I was. I was really interested because I grew up with ghost stories. And we went out there and we just kind of poked around. Had no methodology, no innate understanding of any of this stuff. I had just begun to understand, and study exorcism and a few other topics. So we really had no idea what we were doing, but still, it was fun. I would say that's kind of the last time I have actively gone onto anything. I have interviewed a ton of other paranormal researchers who are much more skilled and knowledgeable in the field. I am still an amateur, a rank amateur, I would say at best. I am more of I always get emails asking me about, well, how can I exercise this demon? I've had one person actually consult me on it. And I said, I can lay out the basics, but at the end of the day, I'm an academic and that's really all I'm ever going to be. So,
Right, right. Yeah, I think once they see somebody that I like, if you're have anything to do with anything, it immediately goes to, oh, you'll be able to help me with anything.
exactly. I mean, I wish I could. I wish I was a lot more practical minded in some of these matters. But at the same time, I've invited enough chaos into my life just by talking about it.
Yeah,
I don't really want to go dabbling any more than that, though.
no, that's completely understandable. I kind of, I definitely understand that. I'm more on the like witchy side of things. So, and I also used to do like readings and all these kinds of things. And so in my little town that I'm from, I'm kind of the the person to go to, the unofficial person to go to. So everybody sends people my way for everything, and sometimes I'm just like, look, you don't need me, you need somebody.
That's
So I
awesome, though.
definitely
It
understand
really
that.
is. I'm going to
Uh,
have you on my podcast and talk about some of your experiences because I would love to hear all about that, honestly.
that would sound amazing. I would love to be on. But yeah, no, I've had extremely crazy experiences, and I really think that I kind of feel bad sometimes because I think my whole family's had a lot of experiences and they've kind of ran away from everything. And actually, my next episode that I'm going to do is going to be about spiritual trauma. And I kind of connect it to ancestral trauma in a way because a lot of times, what I've learned, especially from being Mexican and how our family dynamic works, is
Hmm.
that a lot of our grandparents and our great grandparents and our great aunts and all of them, they are so well versed in witchcraft and even like witchcraft and Catholicism and what we learned, from Mexico and their ancestors. And then also we have this other side from our Native American ancestors, and it all kind of comes together. But it in the next generation over to our older grandparents, kind of, and then our parents, they're absolutely terrified of everything, but they use all the protection stuff, and then they like just when they need it, just when it calls for it, and then they just ignore everything. They don't want to work on themselves spiritually. They don't want to pay attention to like people like me who are working in that sector. And I definitely don't like want to push my beliefs on them or anything like that, but just to like look down on other people when they have the same practices is really, it can be really problematic. But then as soon as they start working on themselves or they go into like any type of spiritual setting, they start to see things and they get scared. And it's hard to explain sometimes that, you can't just change or alter the way that you see things without realizing the environment that you're in. If you're in an environment where the people aren't the greatest, they have bad attachments, they carry things around with them, or they participate in activities that, um, they gather those attachments and things, and you don't acknowledge that, you're gonna see some scary shit, and you can't just run into it and think it's gonna be okay. So there's a lot of balancing out and making sure that you're understanding that there's a spiritual side, there's a physical side, there's an emotional side, and all of those things come together in a way. But I think it's hard for some people to understand, and when people get scared or they feel like they can't protect themselves appropriately, or they feel like they need to just run from it, there's usually something else that's going on too. So
Absolutely.
that's kind of where I work in that range of area.
Well, especially on the one thing that you brought up that's really interesting is the ancestral side. Now, in our family, we go back many, 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 many years, and we we forget a lot of the details. We don't really carry forth, but the one thing that is carried forth in almost every single generation are the ghost stories that are that our family has kind of picked up over the years. I know stories from my great 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 grandmother all the way down to my grandmother that had encountered, they say, the devil. It could just be a generic spirit, who knows, but and then how they resolved it, and it's almost like warnings that have been passed down through the generations. When you encounter this is what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And that has always been such a fascinating topic for me.
Yeah, we definitely have, or at least in my family, we've had a similar experience to that. And there's always something that just happens to come up. And I think my aunt is the last one that really experienced it. But they used to see like eyes and stuff in the closets, and I don't know, she was just tormented for years by something and they could never figure it out. But they did everything. They went to priests, they did sweepings, they went to, our local stores that we have around here and to see who could help. And one day it just kind of goes away and it seems like it waits a bit and it's on to the next like family member or something. It's very interesting, but I definitely understand those things stay in the family. Like they make sure to carry those things on so this is what you need to do.
Exactly. And our family, we have stories not just of the the evil side, but we've also have had very encouraging things, encounters that has happened to them. Like for example, my great grandfather, when he passed away, he was he had a tooth issue, and it had become severely infected. And he was a veteran, so they took him to the um, the local veteran hospital. It was, I think it was in Nashville, which for then was an extremely long way away.
Right.
And that night, the family was sitting on the front porch in the summer heat, and they saw a light trudging down the road. And the further it came, they realized they could see no one holding the lantern
Wow.
until it finally, by itself, wobbled up to the front step, sat itself down, and they heard a booming voice echo, "Your father has died tonight." And then it picked itself up and wobbled away. And sure enough, a few days later, they received a courier who gave them the exact same message. And and everyone that I have spoken to from that generation, they swear that this actually happened.
Right.
And I mean, the details are the same. It's remarkable. I mean, if it was a truly just a ghost tale, then that would be one thing. But, to have that level of clarity that was being repeated time and time again by more than 5 people in a row, it's kind of amazing.
That yeah, no, that is crazy. I do think there's like I don't know, there's in our family we have like these, I don't know what to call them. I think they're signs or my grandmother calls them gifts that we see. She actually had several instances where she sees like white smoke, and she always feels like it's something in those situations. It's always something that is going to like it's warning her of something. She had 4 kids. So on her last one, they weren't sure if she was going to make it. And she saw like this white smoke in front of her. And she was like, I got to keep going. I got to keep pushing. And she ended up being okay. The baby was okay. There's been other times where that's happened and like there was a fire in the house. Another time where that's happened and there was somebody like holding one of my aunts like hostage. It was a crazy situation. And I always thought like she was being over dramatic kind of because she's kind of a character. But then there's been a few times when I've seen it and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what's happening, but I know I need to pay attention. I know I need to look around the house like something's going on. And it's always something, like it's always something like immediate, like, oh God, like I'm glad I noticed this, or this would have been horrible. So there's definitely signs and things and stories that pass around. Um, and I think experiencing them or coming to the part where you start experiencing those things yourself, it feels almost full circle and like, oh God, now I'm really part of the family.
Exactly.
Yeah, because sometimes I feel left out, but then other times I'm like, oh, okay, we are all related, we're all good. We have a few minutes left. Is there anything like specific that you wanted to share or tell us?
Yeah, I sure don't. I offer no services whatsoever. I mean, I do sell a little bit of merch on the side, but that's never been a focus or anything. Really, Southern Demonology is a podcast that's just dedicated to spreading information. There's so much there's so much little valid sources of information, not just about the past, but also current day kind of spiritual warfare types of concepts out there. And I've been very blessed in having a wonderful community that has grown up. We have our own Discord server where we do everything from actually discussing point in time cases that have been brought up in other sources or other types of media, to all the way from just holding a Wednesday night movie night where we all relax, we have some fun, we watch a movie, and then we sit there and discuss it afterwards for a while. So that's really kind of the one thing I would point out. If anyone is like-minded and would like to join, the only rules that we have is that there's no sexism, no racism, no spamming, and no political discussions of any type. We have all walks of faith. You don't even have to have a faith. It doesn't matter as long as you're willing to be a good person and discuss things in a rational manner. Then that's all we ask for. And because that's the thing, like, even though I discuss a lot of concepts that come from ancient Judaism and even modern Catholicism and Christianity, um, it's not dedicated to those topics. I go into Shintoism a decent bit, especially when talking about Japan. So we cover the broad gambit of almost everything that's out there. We've had a couple of episodes about Buddhism and the paranormal, going to Zoroastrianism and Islam. So yeah, we like to pretty much do everything. So.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. I started this podcast in 2018 when I kind of revamped my whole like belief system and everything. So I was like, look, I'm gonna bring y'all guys on the road with me and we're just gonna figure this out together. Um, so
That's
I
awesome.
understand. I think all of my topics and everything have kind of evolved, but I try to pull in everybody. I'm like, look, these are the different things that are believed in the world, and here's how everybody sees it, kind of thing. So but
Exactly.
I've been listening to you like at work when I'm supposed to be working. I mean, I do work, but I'm also listening, and so it's been very enjoyable to listen to your podcast. And I'm definitely going to join that Discord. But if that is everything, I am going to go ahead and stop recording here. But thank you for being on with us.
Oh no, thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk to you. It was wonderful getting to meet you, and I really appreciate meeting other people that are just so nice and kind. I mean, there are so many different ways that people nowadays love to separate and segregate and keep people away, and it's nice just to make a real kind of human connection. So.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that today because uh well, one, I'm really close with my mom, and so she asked what I was doing today, and I was like, "Oh, I'm interviewing this person. Oh, who are you interviewing?" And I was telling her a little bit about you and about your podcast, and she thought it was really cool. But I remember a time where she would probably just hear Southern Demonology and be like, "Gabby, what are you doing?" And so just I think that on my side of things, at least, it's very happy and very um a lot of things have changed on over here, so I'm really happy about that. I'm really happy to be able to talk to you.
Well, the name has certainly gotten me in a little bit of trouble in the past. Because I was, you know, it's just because I come from the South and I really wanted to talk about everything related to demonology, not in a we promote it, but more in a this is how you protect yourself and this is how you educate yourself as to how it was been viewed from ancient Akkadian times to now. And but yeah, I've had certain people that even when I requested them to do an interview, they're like, I don't really know if I want to be on a show called that. And I'm like, I understand, but just let me give you the pitch and then, we'll see how you think.
Right.
Usually I can edge myself out of the danger zone, but not always.
Right. I don't know. I saw it and I was like, "Ooh, Southern," because I'm also from the South, so I was like, I'm totally down for listening.
Well, I appreciate you overlooking the name there.
Yes. Again, thank you for being on.